I've been meaning to make this video for a while now because it's been really bugging me for over a year. So over a year ago I got a review as for one of the companies I was working for, and I got a C grade as an employee. You need to understand that for me, as somebody who's always tried to do world-class work, getting a C grade as an employee really left a bad taste in my mouth. And the feedback I got was that I was doing too good of a job and that I was being too professional, as crazy as that may sound. So the thing that kind of drove me a little bit insane about that was when I asked for legitimate feedback, I couldn't get really solid answers as to what it was that I was looking for. Because the reality being is, when you do really high quality work, if you wanna have a tech go faster, then you have to compromise your quality. But I was still asked to do world-class work, but when I asked, well, what do you want me to change, I couldn't get an answer. So with that in mind, I'd like to flesh out some of these ideas. So, by the way, this door here, this whole thing, I used to ride past this place every day at one of the bike shops, one of the bike manufacturers that I used to work for, and every time I went past it, I thought it was unbelievably cool. The whole thing is backlit. It's really amazing. So I figured I'd put it in the shop. It's awesome. Okay, so I'm hoping the freeway noise isn't too bad. Let's see here. See this little electric scooter here? I used to work for a company that manufactured them and also made it so that you could, basically it's the same exact thing as this, only it was another company. And one of the reasons why that company failed was because of the fact that they never actually really listened to their techs and the technical feedback we would give them on how their scooters were working. So I want to give another example of, right here behind me is where that company used to exist, and they are now officially gone. Poof! Nothing's there. So part of the reason why I want to talk about this isn't necessarily because I think that techs are always the end-all be-all. We don't necessarily have all the answers. But if you hire a good team and you're looking for authentic information and authentic feedback, it's really in your best interest to listen to what it is that they have to say and the information that they're giving you. So a perfect example is the problem that this company had was their scooters would actually catch fire, and there was more than one of them that caught fire. And well, they set a van on fire, they set a warehouse on fire. There's even one that caught fire in Washington, D.C., which is less than optimal as a company. So the whole reason why I mention this is merely because of the fact that if you're going to give somebody a review and you're going to ask for feedback, but then completely dismiss them, there's no point in giving somebody a review. That being said, let's start looking at the things that you can do in order to create a dynamic dialogue between your techs and your managers. Let's start working on that. Okay, let's get to the meat of this video. Ultimately, the point of this video is to talk about how to improve things. I'm not interested in complaining for the sake of complaining. That doesn't do anybody any good. A really important life skill to learn is, if you have a complaint or frustration, how do you bring that complaint or frustration forward and have constructive suggestions on how to make things better. It's actually something that you potentially learn in professional race teams as well as parts of the military. part of the reason why I'm also making this video is because of the fact that I'm trying to convey something that people that work inside the bicycle industry are aware of, that senior and experienced bike mechanics are quitting the industry entirely and simply not working in the industry anymore. Something that has happened more recently to me is one of the best managers of mechanics that I've met in quite some time, because he didn't feel as though he was being heard or listened to and his efforts being acknowledged, quit. And so now we're at a major loss. And so basically one of the reasons why I really wanted to make this video is because of the fact that I'm sincerely concerned about how this is going to play out over the long term, especially as we try to work our way through this pandemic. So I wanted to address this issue. The first immediate suggestion that I have, and all of these suggestions tie together and connect to each other. The first immediate suggestion I have is print out the review that you're planning on giving to your employee. So that way, when you talk to somebody and you do their review, they feel as though they're engaged, they're participating in that review. They're not just sitting there being lectured at. That's not a helpful way to do things at all. And so the other thing being is, when you have a printed review, both parties can make notes on their review. On top of that, the person who's being reviewed can then proceed to take that home and make notes. That's how we improve. In the following weeks and months after review, if you have a physical copy of that review, you can then reflect upon it, pull it back out and re-review it to see how you're doing. On top of that, as I mentioned just previously, if you have a criticism of an employee and you want to see them improve in a certain area, please, for the love of God, don't just say that they need to improve upon something. Give them, ultimately, if at all possible, 3 suggestions on how to improve that one thing. Because if you don't, you're basically handing them a vacuum. You're basically saying, hey, look, this is the problem that I have with your performance. Good luck figuring it out. The other thing being, it's really in your best interest to set up a quarterly or biannual follow-up of that review. Part of the reason why you want to do that is because of the fact that when you have this criticism of an employee and you're then asking them to make an improvement, if you don't follow up to ask the question, well, are you making any improvement of any kind, and having a complete dialogue about it, it doesn't give the employee the opportunity to check in with themselves and you to show whether or not they're improving. The other aspect that directly relates to that is you have to ask yourself the question, have I given my employee, my colleague, ultimately, the tools for success? Do they need more uptraining? Are they aware of what the expectation is in terms of what you're asking them to do? Are they doing a part of the job, but they're just not performing at a high enough level? Or is there something that they're potentially missing? That's a vitally important question. So it's really, really ultra important to follow up on a quarterly or biannual basis to check in, to see how is it going. Also, this helps you as a manager, because ultimately you have to ask yourself, am I being a good manager? Am I giving my employees what they need to be able to succeed? If you can't honestly answer that question, there's a high probability you're not. Another part of asking the question of are you a good manager is getting some feedback from your employees. I would strongly recommend that when you do a review of your employees, have them do some kind of review of you and the job you're doing. Part of the reason why I make this suggestion is because of the fact that I've worked with some moderately good managers, but the reality being is they needed a lot of suggestion or feedback in order to improve. Perfect example. I had one manager who's actually a pretty good manager. not a bad guy at all, pretty personable. But, you know, he didn't know how to read the room when it came to his own personal behavior. He didn't, he was so hyper-focused on what it was that he was trying to do. Certain people basically ended up being neglected, and they felt as though they weren't being given the guidance that they needed. For those junior employees who didn't know how to self-modulate, or regulate, pardon me, self-modulate, I guess another way of putting it. Then the other aspect is he was famous for not giving everybody the information that we all needed. The good example being, as a tech, I personally like being to work a good 10 or 15 minutes early with coffee in hand, ready to get my day on. This one time I showed up and we had a good 30 people in this business who had all brought their vehicles, and all of their vehicles needed to be inspected for a pre-group ride. Gratefully, one of the service managers from another location happened to be there. He jumped in, he gave me a hand. So we're able to take care of all of these customers. But the reality being is this manager didn't bother telling anybody about this group event. And that's a situation where you're setting all of your employees up for failure. If you don't communicate these vital pieces of information about when events are, when meetings are, what goals are, and stuff like that, and you don't give them those most basic fundamental tools, you're setting them up for failure. Another example, this same manager, when I was reviewed, it was in the review that I discovered that I was supposed to be documenting certain pieces of information from our customers every single time that I spoke to a customer. Prior to that moment, I literally had no idea that this was even something that we were supposed to do. As such, in my review, I got a C. I got an F for that specific thing that I was supposed to be doing that I literally didn't know existed. And I can confidently say that while other aspects of what I did were my responsibility, if I didn't even know that something was supposed to happen, if I was so grossly ignorant to not even know to ask the question, that wasn't my fault. That was the responsibility of the manager when I was trained, when I was hired. So it's one of those things where I will completely take ownership if I've done something wrong and I knew it existed, 100%. That being said, if you don't even know you're supposed to be asking this question of your customers to be able to collect that information, you can't. And that's setting you up for failure. Okay. As a general rule, bicycle people and motorcycle people are incredibly passionate, arguably bordering on obsessively passionate about what they do. The reality being is, if you help feed that passion and if you support what it is that people are passionate about, they will be driven to succeed. It becomes an integral part of who they are. The reality being is, bicycles and motorcycles and working on them has actually made me a better human being. It's given me the tools to not only succeed in a professional arena, but it's even given me the tools to be able to succeed and become better just as a human being. I know that may potentially sound like a little bit of a stretch, but it's the truth. For those of you who didn't know me in my 20s, the reality being is I was a dumpster fire, potentially a rolling dumpster fire for that matter. And so in integrating some of those, the ideas that I learned at work, being organized, being on time, being squared away, figuring out your priorities, these things made a major difference in terms of how I actually lived my life and how I set myself up for success within my life. So to me, it's vitally important that I say something publicly about the industry as a whole, because we're losing incredibly talented people, and those people will influence and affect the future of the industry. And to me, that's a really big deal. So I'm going to wrap this up. I really want to thank you for taking the time to listen to what it is that I've had to say. I really hope that you set yourself up for success as well. And I'm hoping that we can move forward and get a whole bunch more videos taken care of now. Take care out there in the pandemic. It's crazy. See ya.